Learning objective 2 looks at how activity-based costing is actually works for a business. We're going to be going through these 4 steps for the business we just looked at, Atlas. Okay. So at first, we're going to identify and classify the activities and then assign overhead costs to the cost pool. Identify the cost driver, compute the activity-based rate, and then we're going to allocate that to the product. So you're going to see these steps play out right here in this objective, one at a time. We are using Atlas Company, as I was saying, from objective 1. Here we have Atlas Company produces, as you see, those the AB bench and the AB coasters. Here are the major activity cost pools that they have identified. Okay, there's manufacturing costs, there are setup costs, there are purchase order costs, there's product development costs, and of course, they have to pay for property and plant. Okay. So those are the cost pools that have been identified. Okay. And the amount of overhead that they cost is listed in the far right column. What you see in the middle column is looking at the type of activity for purposes of classifying the activity. So for example, as you see here, plant and property is listed as a facility level activity because it includes the entire facility. But actually, when they're actually putting these things together, setups and purchase orderings are going to be based on the batch. We're going to be doing a batch of 1,500, units. They only do a certain number at a time when they manufacture these things. It's not a continuous manufacturing system that just keeps spitting these things out. They do them in batches. So you'll learn a little bit about this as we go, but that's really what that second column is about. But the activity pools are going to be critical, and the amount of overhead that they've estimated for that activity, critical information. So that's how it starts. The second thing they do is they identify within the activity what the cost driver is going to be and what's going to be the expected use of that cost driver. This is really, really important. Again, it's in your book. Illustration 4.6 is on page 141, okay, page 141. And it shows you that when they look at the activity being manufacturing of the products, right, the AB bench and the AB, what is it again? Cruiser, whatever. That it's really the machine hours that is the major cost driver in manufacturing, the amount of times, hours those machines will be running to help create those benches and those whatever. And they've estimated that they need 50,000 machine hours to create these particular products. Okay. Of course, these products need to be set up. So in the setup activity, the actual number of setups are the cost driver, and they've identified this that they expect to have 2,000 setups of products for this here. In terms of the purchase ordering, the number of purchase orders they feel they're going to be generating or expecting to generate to produce the number of AB coasters and AB benches is 2,500 purchase orders. Is quite a lot. Product development, how many products were developed? 2 in this case. Property and plant, they're paying for all that square footage. and they expect to use 25,000 square feet to produce the products. Okay. So these are the activities that were mentioned earlier. These are the main cost drivers in each of those activities. And this is how much they numerically come up with how much the expected use. That's important to know because that's going to be part of our calculations coming up. Okay. And again, this illustration is also in your book on the same page, 141. All right, here comes the fun stuff. Now that we know what the cost of the activities are, and we know what the expected use of the cost driver is, we can actually compute the activity-based overhead rate. I want you to pay, this is the formula for it. It's a secret formula. Give me the formula, crabs. But it's a secret formula. Not so secret, right there. What we're really paying attention to, I think where the real learning is going to be, is looking at illustration 4.9. This is also on page 141 at the bottom. So obviously page 141 is going to be critical for you to review because it has these illustrations on it. This is what we were told early on, what the activity cost pool was. That was the first step. Pardon me. We also were told early on in that very first step how much they expected it would cost. Okay, so A and B, column A and B here, the activity and the expected cost of that activity were done early in step one that we saw, right? Step two said, okay, now that we know what the activity cost pool is, what is the driver? What is the driver? And how much are we going to need to use that driver? So for manufacturing, the driver was machine hours, and they told you we were going to need 50,000 machine hours. Okay. Well, if they expect manufacturing to cost $500,000, and that means they want to, and they're expecting to use it for 50,000 hours, that means every time that machine is running, it's $10 an hour for cost. Okay. So this becomes the activity-based overhead rate, $10 per machine hour, depending on how many hours the machine is used to produce a product. That's how you allocate the cost. Okay. So of these 50,000 hours, how much of those hours were used to produce the bench? And how many of those hours were used to produce the coaster? That's going to give you a more accurate cost for overhead for each of those products. Numbers of setups, right? They said they were going to estimate that cost at $100,000. They estimated they would need 2,000 setups. Well, if you're spending $100,000 cost on 2,000 setups, that's $50 for each setup. So how many setups does the bench require versus the coaster, the ab coaster? Because then you can start allocating direct costs for setups. Usually, if the product is more complex, it's going to require more setups. And so that's something to realize. If a product is relatively simple, it's not really going to need much setting up, right? So, but if a product is more complex because it's got more parts, it's going to need more setup. Okay, purchasing orders, $50,000 was the estimate for purchasing orders. That was going to be 2,500 purchasing orders. So every order is going to be $20. They estimated that it was going to be $200,000 for product development. They produced 2 products, right? The ab bench, the ab coaster, $100,000 in product development costs per product. And The plant and equipment, they needed 25,000 square feet is the expectation. They think it's going to cost them $50,000 for that 25,000 square feet, so $2 per square footage. All right. So again, this was given to us in step 1. Then the additional information for step 2, and now step 3, you just calculated the activity-based overhead rates for each of these activities. Okay, step 4. Step 4 basically is how we allocate the overhead costs, okay? We need to know the expected use of those cost drivers for each product. And boom, if you want to look at this particular chart, you will see on the right side, far right side, the expected use for each product. The ab bench is listed first, the ab coaster is listed second, okay? And these are the individual uses. So of the 50,000 machine hours that they expect to use, 30,000 is going to be used on the bench. 20,000 is going to be used on the coaster. But for setups, the 2,000 setups that are needed, the ab bench is a simpler product, so only 500 setups are necessary. Ab coaster is a little bit more of a complex product, so 1,500 of those setups are for the ab coaster. Purchase orders. Well, it looks like the ab coaster is also a more complex product in terms of its ordering. And so of the 2,500 purchase orders that were done, only 750 were for the ab bench, 1,750 were for the ab coaster. 2 products were developed, 1 each, no problem. Of the 2,500 square footage that's necessary, 10,000 of that square feet is allocated for the ab bench production. 15,000 of the 25,000 of square footage is for the ab coaster production. So now you have this information, you can actually calculate those costs. You need this information here, and you need the previous slide, the activity-based overhead rates. Those pieces of information are going to give you the accurate amount that you need. So if you want to continue on here, we're looking at page 142 and on to page 143, in fact, pretty soon. So to allocate the overhead costs, let's take a look at the ab bench. Take a look at the ab bench. We know these are the cost pools. We've been over this already. You learned about how much of those cost pools would be in terms of expected use per product. For the ab bench, those were the numbers we saw on the last slide. 2 slides ago, we calculated the activity-based cost overhead rate for each activity. You get this information from that. And the very last column allocates the cost. So if you have 30,000 machine hours, and each machine hour for the ab bench is necessary, and each machine hour is $10 an hour, you just need to allocate $300,000 to the ab bench for its machinery use, for manufacturing costs. 500 setups at only $50 a setup, $25,000 of setup costs allocated to ab bench. 750 purchase orders times $20 a purchase order, $15,000 allocated to ab bench. 1 product, 100,000. 10,000 square feet at $2 a square feet, $20,000 for property and plant. So the total amount of costs that ab bench is going to cost us in production is $460,000. we're going to produce 25,000 ab benches, units produced. And so each ab bench literally costs us $18.40 for each ab bench we produce. Okay. So it's a relatively cheap product to produce. All right. That's the ab bench. What about the ab coaster? Okay, this is all the ab bench stuff that you just saw. Well, here were the expected use of cost drivers per product. So for ab coaster, it was 20,000 machine hours. It was 1,500 setups. This is big. It was 1,750 purchase orders. That was also big. And it requires more square footage, 15,000. So when you actually multiply it through the rates that you were given, right, earlier, you calculated the activity-based overhead rate. Look how much of a cost it is for the ab coaster. 200,000 in manufacturing costs isn't so bad, but 75,000 for setups versus 25,000 for the ab bench. Purchase orders of 35,000 versus 15,000 for the ab bench, right? And there's more square footage necessary. So it's $30,000 cost allocated. So actually all those ab benches cost $440,000 to create. And guess what? We're only building 5,000 of them. So literally every single ab coaster has a cost. That's a cost of production of $88 versus the ab bench has a cost of $18. That's much different than what you saw with a traditional base costing system, like job order, right, or process, where they basically, the numbers were about the same, really. They were $10 off difference. In reality, it costs this manufacturer a lot more money per unit for an ab coaster. $88 for every ab coaster they build. $18.40 for every bench that they build. Big differences. Big differences. So when you actually compare the traditional cost of, and that's actually for, I don't want to misspeak. This is for overhead, $88 per ab coaster in overhead costs. That doesn't include, that's not total manufacturing costs. I think I caught myself misspeaking there. This is strictly overhead, okay. Because that's what we're doing, allocating overhead costs. So it's not total manufacturing costs, it's just overhead. Total manufacturing costs are shown here. So the direct manufacturing costs for unit, if you use a traditional costing system, we came up with $82 for every ab bench. In reality, using ABC, yeah, materials are okay, direct labor is okay, but look at the difference in overhead. Look at the difference in overhead. The actual cost per unit is much lower than the $82. So if we use traditional costing methods, we would have increased our cost or overstated our costs by $11.60. Using ABC would give us a lower direct cost that's a little bit more accurate based on the activities that are used to create each ab bench. The ab coaster, traditional cost methods, which we did in chapter 2 and chapter 3, would have only allocated $30 to overhead per ab coaster for a total of $72 in total overhead, total manufacturing costs. When in fact, the overhead, using activity-based costing, once we identify those cost drivers and see how much we're really spending to create an ab coaster, you can see $88 is significantly higher than 30 bucks, which means our real cost to produce a coaster is 130 bucks, not 72 bucks. We understated the cost by 58 bucks if we use traditional cost methods. Okay. That matters because we have to sell these. We're not producing them to keep them around the warehouse. We're producing them so we can sell those. So the price that we sell those at are going to be, it's important for our, if you remember from financial accounting, our gross margins, gross profit margins are going to be off substantially if we use the traditional costing method and we don't price it based on activity-based costing. So we're really, as it says here, sacrificing profitability if we actually use a traditional cost system rather than ABC. Okay, and this is something that's good to study. I'm going to review it with you. It's on page 144 and onto 145. But this is basically going to be very much like your homework. And of course, I'm not going to be seeing you next Monday because of the holidays. So you'll have an extra couple of days to get all this stuff done. But nonetheless, this is typically what you're going to get in terms of homework for this particular chapter. And again, this is the bulk of it. Learning objective 2 is the real work in this whole chapter. The rest of the chapter is not bad at all. Okay, let's take a look at Casey. Casey Company actually has 5 activity cost pools and 2 products. Okay, what are the products? Well, they have automotive scissor jacks and truck hydraulic jacks. That's the product. Those are the 2 products. They're going to produce 200,000 units of these auto scissor jacks. They're going to produce 80,000 units of the truck hydraulic jacks. Okay. Having identified its activity cost pools and the cost driver, Casey Company accumulated the following data related to them. So here's the data. Never argue with the data. So here's the annual overhead data that's produced from you. Here are the 5 activity pools that are listed. These are the main cost drivers in each of those pools. Okay. This is the amount of money that they've estimated each of those activities will cost them. So that's the same as part 1 or step 1. Next is they give you the expected use, right? So of all of these purchase orders, well, they expect this $200,000, it's going to be for 2,500 purchase orders. Of the machine setups, they think it's going to be 1,200 setups. 800,000 machine hours are going to be used. 3 million parts are going to be used. 35,000 tests are going to be used. Okay, and these are the costs of each of the total costs. So you then have to figure out, right? Part of part 3 is figure out the activity-based cost per activity, right? So how much is each order? Right? How much is each setup going to cost? How much is each machine hour costing the company? How much of each part is going to cost the company? And how much are each of these tests costing the company? Then they give you the information for each product. Here are for the auto scissor jacks. Each of the pieces of information here are reflected for your cost pools. And these are the hydraulic jacks for the trucks. And again, numbers are put. So all of these are step by step. Okay, so using the data provided, they ask you to prepare a schedule showing the computations of the activity-based overhead rates per cost driver. That's the first thing they're asking you to do. B is to prepare a schedule assigning that overhead cost to the two products. C asks you to compute the overhead cost per unit for each of those products. And then they want some commentary once you compare those two products and the costs. They just want you to write a little paragraph or so about the observations you made. All right, so part A, prepare the schedule showing the computations. Okay, so if you have $200,000 of ordering and receiving, and you expect that to give you 2,500 purchase orders, that's $80 an order. If you have $600,000 in machine setup costs and you need 1,200 setups, that's $500 for every setup. If you've allocated $2 million to machining, and you expect that you're going to need 800,000 machine hours to produce all this, it's $2.50 for every machine hour. You have $1.8 million for 3 million parts, and so each part is 60 cents. And you have $700,000 for 35,000 tests, and so that's $20 per test. So that is part one. Any questions so far? We're doing okay? Okay. B, prepare the schedule assigning the overhead costs activity-based costs to the two products. So again, here you got scissor jacks here for the cars, hydraulic jacks here for the trucks. They've already told you what the expected use of each is for the cars jacks, and the expected use of each driver for the truck hydraulic jacks. You just calculated the activity-based costs earlier, right? That's what we were doing. And so $80 for every order, $500 for every machine setup, $250 for every hour the machines are running, 60 cents for every part, and $20 for every test. So the scissor jacks are going to cost you these amounts individually. Total costs $2,560,000. Okay. When you look at the hydraulic jacks for the trucks, again, all the rates are going to be the same, but the expected number per product is different. So you simply calculate that through 1,500. So it's more ordering for the hydraulic jacks. There's more machine hours for the hydraulic jacks. There are more parts needed for more machine hours needed for the hydraulic jacks. More parts, well, actually less parts. Yes, let's do our part. Less parts are needed for that, and looks like there's going to be more tests. No, actually less tests, sorry, 15,000 versus 20,000. And so when you add all those up, the costs of the hydraulic jacks in total, $2,740,000. Okay. Now you've seen up here, just so you can put two and two together here, the total amount of overhead is 5.3 million. When you add these two numbers together, you'll get the 5.3 million, just so you know that it's just breaking up this by, in this case, by each of the products, by scissor jack and by hydraulic jack. What I don't see here is cracker jack. I'm getting a little hungry for a snack. Okay. Part C here, compute the overhead cost per unit for each product? Well, you already know what the total costs are because that's what you just did. How many units are going to be produced? Well, early on it told us we were going to do 200,000 scissor jacks and 80,000 truck hydraulic jacks. And so when you divide the number of units that you produced by the cost, each scissor jack for auto scissor jacks are going to be $12.50 for overhead costs per auto scissor jack. Obviously, for the truck hydraulic jack, you're only producing 80,000 of them, and it costs you 2.7 million. So it's more than 34 bucks per hydraulic jack. So a much higher cost to produce that in terms of overhead. And part D here is just the comment that they're looking for, right? The data shows that the cost of producing 80,000 hydraulic jacks is higher than producing 200,000 auto scissor jacks, okay? The hydraulic jack is $34.25 each in overhead costs versus $12.80 in overhead costs for every scissor jack. That's basically the commentary that they're looking for here. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back to our main screen and see if there are any. I'm going to stop recording and see if there's any questions.